views expressed in this video are solely those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization or entity that may be affiliated with. We encourage the viewer to conduct their own research. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Pack Breakers, a show dedicated to tobacco harm reduction and the people of tobacco harm reduction. So today, if you are aware that within the South African context, part of the tobacco bill process had to be fed into NEDLAC, and that happened towards the end of last year, 2024. And we've now just, that NEDLAC report, which is, for those who don't know, NEDLAC is a vehicle that's used in lawmaking in South Africa where constituencies participate in almost a collaboration between government and stakeholders, and those stakeholders include business, communities, and a number of other people that would be impacted by the passing of that bill. That report has come out, and if you had seen the Business Live report not so long ago, you would understand that there was some kind of concerns raised by the business constituency within the NEDLAC process, the involvement of foreign NGOs in the lawmaking process and in the NEDLAC process. So what I've asked is a very good friend of mine, Nancy Loucas from Cathra, to come on and share some of her experiences and what she has seen from their region with regards to these involvements of NGOs in lawmaking and policy creation in the tobacco control field. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Nancy to the Pack Breakers. Good afternoon or good evening, Nancy.
Good morning, Kurt. It's evening here in New Zealand. How are you?
Good, and yourself?
I'm good,
That's
thanks.
good.
I'm good.
So Nancy, before we start, it's become a tradition in the Pack Breakers to understand if you had smoked in the past and if you are currently a vapor, and just give us a little bit of background as to that.
Okay. Well, like many of my peers, we were nicking cigarettes from our parents when we were in primary school. So, I think I lit up my first cigarette and got a head rush when I was about 11. I was smoking pretty regularly by the time I was 12. Sounds horrible. But both my parents smoked, my grandparents smoked. I mean, I grew up surrounded by people who smoked, right? And when I moved to New Zealand, which was 2007, my brother gave me a cig-a-like. Because he's like, yeah, cigarettes are really expensive over there. You might want to, do this. And of course, I got to New Zealand and there were no cig-a-likes. The market was so kind of underground. So I went back to smoking for a bit. And until I figured out how I could get vaping and vaping products, I was probably, 39 or 40 at that point. And I'm now 58, so I've been vaping since, yeah, almost 19 years at this point. And I do vape. I vape freebase. I'm an open tank girl. I'm not a pod or a Nick Salt girl. And I don't envision ever stopping because it's more, I use nicotine. I use nicotine. It sounds terrible, but nicotine helps me focus. It keeps me calm. And it's also the hand to mouth thing.
Yeah.
And that's been the hardest thing of all of it. I mean, even when I was making the transition, it's the hand to mouth thing. So that's my story in a nutshell. And of course, I got involved in advocacy because I wanted people to have access to what I had access to. And I wanted to be around for my kids because my mom died from smoking related issues when she was my age, shit, 58.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to do it to my kids. So that's my story.
Can you, I know that we're going a little bit off the topic, but can you feel any difference in after you had switched from smoking to vaping?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I didn't get sick as much. I used to be very sensitive to germs. I would get bronchitis every year. I would always have the sniffles and the coughs. And, when I get asthma, like asthmatic attacks. My blood pressure was a little wacko. Everything's kind of stabilized. I feel healthy. I feel pretty good.
Well, that's excellent.
So I can feel the difference. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about CAFRA. What is CAFRA, and where did it start, and what is its aim with regards to the space?
Okay. Well, CAFRA is the Coalition of Asia Pacific Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates. And it kind of grew out of an Asia Pacific group that was part of INCO when INCO still existed. And I pushed for it because one of the things that I noticed and that all the other people in Asia Pacific noticed was that when people were talking about advocacy and they were talking about tobacco harm reduction, it had a very Western mindset. Things in Asia don't work like they work in the West. It's a different culture. It's more about collectivism as versus the individual. And people just didn't understand. So that's kind of where it developed from, and then we just kind of ran with it. So right now, CAFRA is a volunteer coalition of 11 consumer advocacy groups. We have a couple in Asia Pacific. We have a couple of individuals from various countries within Asia that don't have a quote unquote proper group. But our main aim is to support consumer advocacy and THR throughout the entire region. It doesn't matter to us if you're a single person. It doesn't matter, if you're a group or we all work together. We would like to call it the big dysfunctional family because we do work together. We support each other on submissions. We support each other with, press releases and quotes and information, and we share everything. It actually, it is, I don't want to say it's a, I don't want to say it's an INCO because it's not an INCO because we don't do grants or anything like that. But you see, Kurt knows this, and some of the other people who know me know this. I mean, I'll help
Yeah,
anybody. Um, it's sharing information, it's supporting each other. It's kind of like a family, and only the focus is THR.
absolutely, absolutely, and it is. It's been a great help for me personally and for the VSML movement to get some of the information that's happening on the outside, because it's well known, or at least amongst the consumer advocates, that it's quite a lonely existence. And you need those
Mm-hmm.
friends from all over the world to not only share information, but also prop you up a little once in a while. So I have a big thank you to you and to your team and the other consumer advocates around the world for helping me on this journey. So I've noticed this, and it's really, you sound like a conspiracy theorist when you start talking about these things with individuals. And I've noticed that there's an involvement by one particular individual or one particular group in almost everything to
Mm-hmm.
do with tobacco control, not only in LMICs, but in North America. And wherever you go, the same name keeps popping up. And I know that Clive Bates and Mark Gunter have spoken about this quite a lot. And that is what they call the Bloomberg complex, and how
Mm-hmm.
that is now fed even into the World Health Organization. And what I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed, the name keeps cropping up. So we've seen it not only in public hearings where these groups are represented, which they, by all means, they have every right to have representation in public hearings, but we see them in funding anti-vaping, or at least vaping specific research in South Africa. We've seen them, for example, our biggest one is the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, which was funded by the
Mm-hmm.
Bloomberg Philanthropies through CDC Foundation. Then we'll see, for example, the South African Medical Research Council released a report that is connected, or South African Medical Research has written a report about vaping around hookers and hooker advertising and its proximity to universities. And that was paid for by the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look a little bit deeper, you'll understand that Bloomberg has paid X amount of millions to the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids. So there's this whole network of foreign NGOs all getting funding from one source, being involved in these activities. Can you share a little bit around that, what you've noticed in your area?
Well, we first noticed it in the Philippines a few years ago. And Clarice in the Philippines did a bunch of research. I helped her with it, and we found how the machine, I want to call it the machine. I know it sounds conspiracy theory, how the machine operates. Okay. And what happens is either through the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids or Bloomberg Philanthropies or the WHO, because they are all intertwined. It's a bit incestuous. They will go to a country that they feel is that's on their target list. And there is a target list, and it's mostly low and middle income countries. And they come in with this plan that, we need to control, and it's not just tobacco, but I'm going to focus on tobacco for a minute. We need to help these people. These people need help, whether they ask for it or not, that we need to help them. So what happened in the Philippines is they sent someone over to help them write their tobacco control policy. Okay. And they almost got away with it until somebody informed the Senate, the Philippine Senate, that a foreigner was writing this law. And then all hell broke loose, and we saw what happened in the Philippines, that those people were, we're not going to have that. And they rewrote the law, and they regulated vaping. Now, Philippines was my first experience with it, but then afterwards we found out the same thing was happening in Pakistan. The entire Pakistan Tobacco Control Department were Bloomberg operatives. And I hate to call them operatives, but they were put there, here, let us help you have a tobacco, control group. Here's these two people. And it kind of snowballed from there. We found out about how in Mexico, a Bloomberg lawyer wrote the law for the ban there. And the thing that when we started researching this, it's like an octopus, Kurt. Okay. And, and it's a machine, and it's a self-serving machine. And I'm going to try to explain this in the most simplest way possible. Okay. Is you have the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids, who you think, okay, they just function on tobacco. But no, they're involved in all these other different things like healthy cities and protecting cultures, and they've gone global. Okay, they're not just a US thing. So what happens is groups like NEDLAC or other groups that, government health departments, they'll be offered help. They're like, hey, listen, you see you've got a problem here with smoking or obesity or whatever it is, let us help you. And of course, the governments are like, oh, great, because most of these governments don't have money for this, nor do they have the resources, the human resources. Sure, let's do that. And this is how it's insidious. This is how they get in. Okay, it's almost predatory the way they target the countries that they're going to go to help, because money talks, right? They know what they're doing. Julie Wesner from CASA, actually, I think it was Julie, who called it philanthropic colonialism. Okay. And that's what it is these people go in, they, hey, you've got a problem, let us help you. I mean, and to be honest with you, a lot of the NGOs in the world have done a lot of good. But what the problem with the person we're talking about and that group that we're talking about is that they take their good works and then they force their agenda on people, and people just take it, because what else are they going to do? They don't have money. They can't, they don't have the resources, the funds to develop policies. So yeah, this is great. This makes life so much easier. Not realizing or caring, of course, that there's an agenda behind it. And it's the same thing they're doing with sugar. It's the same thing they're doing with alcohol. It's like the fun police, but that's because Michael Bloomberg is an NCD ambassador. He is an ambassador for non-communicable diseases.
And that's for the WHO, correct?
And that's for the WHO, okay? And he gives them $1 bazillion a year too. What I found is that, when you're an old white rich guy, I mean, wow, look at me, I'm doing all this good stuff. I mean, it's got to be a bit of an ego thing for him, okay? Number one. And he's a big cheese, and he's used to being a big cheese. But what's happening is the machine that needs his money is creating, I'm seeing anyway, creating problems where none exist in order to maintain that agenda and that funding and that relevance. Okay, it's the same thing that we see in academia with all these academics that jump on board and say, oh my God, the children, Hold on a minute. Look at the stats. The kids, the vaping rate's gone down. The smoking rate is non-existent. Why are we not celebrating that? But no, we need to maintain relevance. We need to maintain funding. We need to feed the big boss this information so that he stays engaged and still opens up his wallet. That's what's
So
happening.
I mean, it's quite funny is that the campaign for tobacco-free kids, and we got to be fair, have done phenomenal work with
They
regards to
have.
tobacco control in their early days.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at, for example, the National Youth Tobacco Survey of the United States, we see
Mm-hmm.
that for the first time in recorded history is we've now seen a smoke-free generation. The kids
Yes.
in the United States are not smoking. There was time
Right.
that they were vaping up to 28%, I think 27.9%,
Mm-hmm.
but within a very short space of time, that dropped by 70 plus percent. And now we're looking at around 7.8% of past 30-day
Mm-hmm.
use. So there's almost this generation of, if we'd like, a nicotine free, not even a smoke free generation
Right.
being seen in North America. So now the way I see it is now the campaign for tobacco-free kids, in order to stay relevant, have to now move to other parts of the world for the same reason that you've said, and you'd probably find out that they'll branch into other areas, like you've said, clean cities or safe cities or whatever it might be, just to keep that infrastructure, that economy,
Yeah.
that machine going.
Mm-hmm.
But they are using their influence now in policy making in these small
Exactly.
LMICs.
And this is the problem, Kurt, because and this is another thing that what came about after the Philippines is that it came in from these people were coming in from the States, right? Now they've set up overseas offices because it was brought to their attention that a United States citizen trying to influence policy in a foreign country is a big no. So now they have local offices everywhere so that they don't run into those problems. Okay. I don't hate NGOs. I don't even hate the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids. I don't hate anybody. But I agree with you. A lot of good was done. But the problem came when they realized that they did too good of a job. And now what are we going to do? And that's something that I think is an issue for most of tobacco control. They need to do something. They don't know how to pivot. If you're in public health, right? And this is coming from my research background. If you're in public health, you can pivot to another topic. But these people have been doing this for so long, they don't want to have to pivot mid career or almost end career to something else. So they're going to stay the course so they can collect their pension and carry on. But Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids, I did some research last week, and they are actually, the web is going out. And like I said, it's obesity, it's safe cities, it's alcohol, it's childhood social media, all of that. And the thing that I find a bit hypocritical, let's just say, is that they use those same kids for their campaigns against what they're against. So it's almost predatory to me in a way, and that's probably not the right word, and I can't think of it right now, but they're using those very same people that they say they're there to protect to push their agenda.
They're weaponizing children.
That's it. Thank you. Well, it's late, people. Okay, I've been up for like 14 hours.
But the sad thing for
Yeah, they're
me,
weaponizing.
yeah, the sad thing for me is that yes, we're all on the same page. We don't want kids to use tobacco. We don't want
Right.
kids to use nicotine. We're all on the same page. But the real hard reality is that smoking kills 8 million individuals every year. That the vast
Yep.
majority of people that do smoke come from low middle income countries,
Yep.
from marginalized areas, and they typically
Hmm.
are adults. And
Yes.
with this work that we've seen with these NGOs, is now encroaching on the opportunities of adults to switch to safer
Hmm.
alternatives, because the regulations that have been proposed make these products incredibly difficult to, first of all, obtain,
Hmm.
make them expensive because they also introduce excises. They, in order to
Yes.
make sure that the kids with the pocket money don't buy these products, but making it incredibly expensive for poorer communities to now take that opportunity for safer alternatives. And a whole host of things because now the adults who smoke are collateral damage, just so that they
Right.
can drive their agenda under the campaign of protecting the kids. But what
Here's
about,
the other
yeah,
thing.
well, what about the kids of those individuals or those adults that do smoke? What about
Yep.
those kids?
That's I've brought that up on numerous occasions. You're sitting here focusing on the kids. I did this in New Zealand, and they actually listened to me, which was surprising. But this was about 6, 7 years ago. I said, think about these kids that are growing up in houses where people smoke. I said, the only reason I smoked is because my parents and my grandparents smoked, and I'd sit in a car and I was like, ah. But think about another aspect of this, okay? If a parent smokes, chances are they're going to get sick. Chances are they're going to die. Think about these kids from the perspective of not so much you're worried about them smoking or vaping, but think about these kids growing up without their elders. Think about the financial strain on these kids because dad can't work or mom can't work because they're so sick, or the financial strain of cancer treatment or heart disease. And think about it from, if you want to think about the children, let's think about it from that perspective. Okay. As someone who lived through it, okay, but they don't want to, and here's the thing that it just twists me a bit is that they say they don't want tobacco, they don't want people using tobacco, yet some of the activities that some of these people do, it actually protects the tobacco trade. And not just in countries where you have tobacco growing and production and manufacturing. I mean, it's the excise is a cash cow, kind of like what happened in the states with the master settlement agreement. Okay, they got that money and they didn't use it for health. They used it for roading and all this other crazy stuff.
Golf
Okay,
courses.
golf courses, right? All sorts of insane stuff. And it's almost like they don't want to lose that money because I know in some countries, I know for a fact in some countries that tobacco excise that they collect funds medical research.
Yeah.
It's actually the tobacco excise funds the antis.
Yeah.
So it's like you're talking in dos caras. They're talking out both sides of their mouths. So yeah, it's we see it because we live it. And this is another thing. And I've said this to a few people. We see things that other people don't see because we've lived it. Okay. I don't think that public health, all the people in public health are horrible human beings. I really don't believe that. I believe some of them got into it because they saw somebody get sick and die from smoking. But I also think they've been programmed. And because I have a background in academia, I kind of understand they're in an environment where it's publish or perish. And you probably know this as well. Okay. A lot of people don't realize this. If you're in academia, if you're in a university, okay, you have to publish, you have to do research, or you won't get your tenure, you won't get that professorship. Okay. So it all really does, in the end, boil down to this.
And
And
the reality is, it's not just publish; it's a frequency of how much frequency of publishing. We're
yeah, and
noticing,
where?
and where we're noticing that it's no
No.
longer about good quality research. It's
No.
about this,
Mm-mm.
just the sheer volume of research that's coming out. And that's another topic that we might want to raise in the pack breakers with some people in academia, is that the whole peer review process seems to be broken too.
Yeah.
And the issue around this is that when I went into this after I quit smoking and started vaping and started realizing this, hang on, this could very well help me and the rest of my family that was still alive and still smoking, and some of my friends. This is a good thing. Everybody you should know about this. This is fantastic. We've been wanting
Yeah.
to do this for the last 50 years, and
Yeah.
I then walked into this web of almost like a novel, of individuals that actually saying that they want to see the end of smoking, but acting in a way that will prevent the faster decline of smoking around the world. As you said, by protecting the cigarette trade, protecting
Hmm.
the very thing that they're fighting against. And that to me has always been the one of the most difficult things to hurdle is maybe a dreamer of to saying, well, we've got the solution, guys, run around,
No, 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 no. No, it's
you
not
walk
you. It's
into it.
not you. No, Kurt, I had this discussion with Judy Gibson about 8 years ago. We were sitting there and we were talking, and Judy said, "You know what it is?" I'm like, "What?" She goes, "It's the Truman Show."
Okay.
She nailed it. Think about it.
Yeah.
It's what it is. Okay, it's an alternate reality. Because we grew up. I'm going to presume because we're about the same age. I'm probably older, but that's okay. We grew up in a time where people on the news told the truth. They gave you both sides of the story so you could figure it out yourself. Critical analysis. We grew up in a place where people would say something and they had integrity and they meant what they said and they had the information to back it up. Okay. Now we live in a world, well, I call it the post-truth world. I'm always running around going, the post-truth world, here we go. It's not about what you say, it's about the amount of airtime you get. And it's not about telling the truth, it's about being the first to say something. And the problem with that, and this affects all of us, is that they will put a story out there that is completely fake. I'm doing a whole thing with Clarice on misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation, right? They will put a story out there that's completely fake, including, we've seen it with scientific journals and articles and things. As long as they get it out there, as long as that idea is out there, people are going to believe it because they're still programmed to believe what these people say, whether it's true or not. Okay. And then our job winds up being that we have to say, hey, hold on a minute. This isn't right. And they may retract it or a journal may pull it off, but it's too late because it's already out there.
And the reality is
That's the
retraction.
problem.
The reality is retraction is a very slow process and very seldom
Yes.
actually seen. Um, and the other thing is that they take advantage of modern society where everything is in the
Hmm.
headline and the subheadline, and very few people actually take the time to now look at this research and see how it fits and whether there is something that was not clearly defined. And we're living through that at the moment in South Africa with youth vaping, a
Hmm.
recent youth vaping study
Yeah.
that was released in December highlights the sheer growth of vaping amongst high schools. And it just
Hmm.
didn't pass the sniff test with me because South Africa is the most unequal society in the world. There's constant reports around the, the situation of schools in South Africa. Some of the schools don't even have running water or proper sanitary, and
Yeah.
we're seeing up to 40% of kids that go to school drop out before they even finish their school career. And now they're suggesting that almost 17% of these high school kids are vaping. And I'm thinking,
How?
how are these kids affording these products, given the fact
Hmm.
that they are almost living on the poverty line, or some of them even below the poverty line? How is 16% of high school kids actually vaping? And when you look into the actual study, it was quickly established, or I quickly established that it was based around an internet survey conducted at these high schools. And then you look a
Hmm.
little further and you realize that when the study was conducted, or when the survey was conducted of these kids, that only 10% of schools in South Africa had access to the internet. Then you look at what the other criteria of these schools, and that is that 69% of the people that participate, of the students that participated in the survey, go to single sex
Hmm.
schools. Again, atypical of schools in South
It's
Africa.
they do that here too. They do it here too. Okay, and it's interesting to me. And I brought this up. You know me, I'm always a teller of unpopular truths. I'm like, okay, so if you go and you survey a bunch of kids in a private school, let's break this down. You got a kid, what we call private school, okay, single sex school, whatever, private school, not in the public school system. Okay, number one, they're coming from a very high socioeconomic cohort. they've got access to funds. These are the kids, and I'm not saying all parents do this, but a lot of them do this, and they did this even when I was a kid, okay? Mommy and daddy give them whatever they want, and they don't really follow up too much. So they give them a credit card or a debit card at 16, right? It is not representative of the whole. It's a small group, a small privileged group that is doing this. And it makes sense when you think about it that way because they're the only ones that could possibly afford it. But then they take it and they extrapolate it out to say it's everybody.
Yep.
That's how they play with numbers. Yeah. That's how they do this. And of course, if you look at PAVE moms in the state. We have our own version here called Vape Free Kids. So similar. These are upper middle class moms outraged about vaping. And my first thought is like, hold on a minute.
Be a parent.
You expect, be a parent. Yeah, be a parent. Imagine that. But no, it's everybody else's fault. No, sweetheart. You need to get your millennial head around the fact that you need to be a parent. And of course, I blame my generation because obviously we screwed up with our kids because our kids are the millennials.
Yeah. It doesn't even go, it's not even the selection bias that upset me the most because it's easy to understand that yes, that's the only schools that would vape, but it would be nice that you put it into context and highlight it as this is the cohort and what that cohort represents for the whole high school community. But what incensed me the most is that when we looked at the percentages that they were referring to, the denominators they were using in these percentages changed frequently. And in some cases, it was the survey was done of 25,000, just over 25,000 high school kids. Huge survey. And then if you look at some of the percentages that they were highlighting, one of the most damning, like, wow, that's shocking, is that they said that 61% of the kids in these schools were addicted to nicotine. And if you look at the denominator that they were using to establish that 60%, it calculated the denominator was 743 kids. Of the over 4,000 kids that had said that they had vaped, they were only using 783. And they were even as bizarre as it is, they even created their own novel way of defining nicotine addiction, stepping away from the stock standard default everybody uses Fogelstrom's dependency test. They created their own way of testing dependency, and it was just sucked up. It was just, this is shocking. Everything that was said was just consumed, and it's just lived its own life. It's just literally
it was written to do that.
Yeah, every single week.
It was written to do that. Yeah. Yes. We've got it here. We still have it here. I mean, and just to segue a minute, okay? It's interesting to me, first of all, I'm going to say this. It's interesting to me because we can read this stuff and we understand it and we can, look at it and go, what the hell is this? And yet the people that are creating this are going, you don't know what you're talking about. And then if you call them out on it, automatically, you're a tobacco company shill or something, right? So in thinking of this, because I've had plenty of time to think about this, if they can't argue with you on the science and they have to start calling you names, obviously you've won that argument. They know they've done something they shouldn't have done. But we live in a world where it doesn't really matter because people will suck it up. So they're basically playing the game. Okay. And I've been, we've talked about this numerous times within CAFRA about, playing the game. Do we play the game? And, we always say we're going to take the high road. I mean, because ultimately in the end, I could sit there and I could, blast people on Twitter or social media and stuff. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to prove anything. The only way we're going to be able to debunk it is when we have the people that are pro-THR and the scientists and the people who have integrity and understand what the concept of scientific method is to go after them. But the thing is, there's a lot of people sitting on the fence right now, and they're afraid to say anything because of the pressure from their institution. Keep your mouth shut, keep your head down.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, that is that top down pressure. The WHO says this. You know, we've spoken to Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids, and they've said this. One of the anti groups here in New Zealand is actually closely affiliated with GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. Um, and then, you know, you take that and you kind of build out a little bit, they're accusing us of the stuff that they're doing. They're just projecting it on us.
Yeah.
And I've had to say that to a couple of advocates who just go like, oh my God, I can't do this. I'm like, no. You need to look at it from this point of view. They're accusing us of the stuff they're doing. Not that we're doing it, but that's all they know. They figure this is the way things operate, so they must be doing exactly what we're doing, except instead of doing it with the pharmaceutical companies, they're doing it with the tobacco companies.
So, I mean, let's get back to this involvement of this complex, this octopus, this machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that they're also not only exploiting the media and the press with knowing full well that who's ever first wins
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing,
Yeah.
and screw the facts and screw the context. But they're also exploiting what I'm seeing, exploiting the fact of how difficult it is for academia to secure grants.
Yep.
There is so little, there's so much demand and so little supply with regards to grants, and it's even made worse now with, for example, the Trump's cutting of ARD, and I think that this is now exploiting this situation even further. Is that the likes of these philanthropic billionaires, Gates included, and Bloomberg,
Mm-hmm.
is to now fill that need or the demand with funding. We've
Yeah.
seen lots of Gates and Bloomberg funded research on a whole host of public health topics. And,
Yes.
you know, if we're going to judge, if we're going to place judgment or some kind of skepticism or question mark around research in, let's say, for example, tobacco that's funded by a tobacco
Mm-hmm.
company, shouldn't that same kind of
Yeah.
scrutiny be placed on funding
Yes.
supplied by a, a philanthropic billionaire who has an
Mm-hmm.
agenda, and that agenda might not be related to profits or related to the growth of a business. It might just be creating a legacy, that ego,
Yeah.
the
An
I
ego.
am the super being. Surely that same kind of that scrutiny and same kind of focus and same kind of transparency, I think, is the big word. Yeah, needs to be driven
Mm.
on all research and put on
Yes.
the table up front.
Yes, and I think it should be. I mean, for example, in India, the government banned any research into THR. Now, this was a few years ago. In countries that are so heavily invested in tobacco, India, China, Indonesia, I mean, you kind of expect them to be afraid of safer nicotine products because it's cutting into the government coffer, right? But then, to, to bring this out, then to have the WHO give India an award for tobacco control, or Vietnam. Vietnam's a big tobacco, got it's the Vintaba, right?
Yep.
And this is the thing we deal with in Asia Pacific is that you have these countries that are heavily invested and government interests in tobacco, and they're getting award. They're banning safer nicotine products, okay, and they're getting awards from the WHO, but nobody's saying anything about the tobacco.
And what about 5.3, Article 5.3?
Okay, yeah. What about Article 5.3 that you throw in my face and say you can't talk to me because but you're handing an award out to the head of the Indian or the Malaysian
Public
Ministry of
health,
Health.
yeah.
Okay, and here's the thing about 5.3 that most people don't understand is that 5.3 was put in there. I talked to somebody who actually helped write that. Okay, he lives in New Zealand. And he's like, 5.3 wasn't put in there to exclude people. 5.3 was put in there for transparency. and it's been weaponized to use to exclude people.
It's a
They
very
don't even know what they're.
it's a very same conversation I had with Dr. Derek Yak, who was one of the
Yeah,
architects of the
yeah,
FCTC.
he was there too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and also the Article 1D with regards to harm reduction.
harm reduction.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's included in there.
Okay.
And now
I mean,
we've lost complete plot, and it goes
yeah,
back to we've lost the focus on what the whole WHO FCTC was about, and that is to
yep,
prevent the harm of smoking. It wasn't
yes.
to stop smoking. It wasn't to bash the tobacco companies. It wasn't. It was purely to prevent the harm of smoking.
And the undue influence of tobacco companies on public health policy.
Yes,
Yes.
and
Okay. Robert Beaglehole lives here in New Zealand. And he and I went up to his house to do an interview once, and we sat there for about 2 hours. It was great. And he was explaining all, and I'm like, so I'm not like a mad. He's like, no, 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 you're right. You're interpreting it right. He's like, but somewhere along the way, somebody just kind of went and went off this. I said, well, and I'd love to talk to him again. I haven't spoken to him in a few years, but now you look at it and you look at how the focus has gone now from tobacco to vape to nicotine.
absolutely
FCTC was never written about nicotine.
no.
But nicotine, if we look at nicotine, Kurt, it's a pharmaceutical thing because there's a lot of research going on about nicotine for helping with Parkinson's and all these other like neuro diseases. Okay. They don't want us to have that because not if they can make money on it.
Yeah,
Okay. So, yeah, it's definitely lost its way. I did a presentation at the Asia Forum on nicotine back in, Lord, time just flies. I think it was 2018 or 2019, maybe. It was before COVID, I think, about how the FCTC, the treaty is not fit for purpose anymore because three reasons. One, it's been bastardized to suit a particular agenda. It doesn't hold to what the actual articles are. Two, it was never future proofed to deal with different products and to be able to say, okay, yeah, you know what, if you smoke and you want to use a safer nicotine product, by all means do that. But let's make sure we have triggers in place to protect it from being used by people it shouldn't be used by. Okay. And also the 5.3. It was there for transparency. It was not there to exclude people. And the fact that they're using 5.3 to exclude stakeholders, civil society, and their definition of civil society, and they're a UN organization. Excuse me?
mm.
Okay. But, the kind of change that has to happen. I mean, Derek has touched upon this a few times. I mean, Clive will turn around and tell you, get rid of the whole thing and let's start all over again. Derek will say, well, no, we can't get rid of the whole thing, but it needs a complete overhaul. I think that somewhere in between those two is what needs to happen. But it's going to take somebody who's got money and the gravitas that people will actually listen to them. As long as the philanthropic people are giving the WHO money and holding them up, it's not going to happen. So it's got to happen at the ground. It's got to happen with the local people. It's got to happen when you go and talk to people and I go and talk to people and other people go and the local groundswell, because the only way we're going to get this to change, I think, is to get the public on our side. And the only way we're going to get the public on our side is for them to realize, yeah, they're coming after us today, but they're coming after you tomorrow.
But I think it's based on the there's a lot of distrust around the World Health Organization, particularly since
Yeah.
2020. And I think that would eventually translate um, into into elections at one stage, where countries like South Africa, if it now becomes known that the influence of policy is being dictated by the World Health Organization, and in turn, who is receiving enormous amounts of funding from these philanthropic billionaires, who's to say that this is probably going to be sooner rather than later, given the fact that we are facing enormous challenges, particularly around cost of living and a whole host of
Everywhere.
pressures that
Here's
we don't
the
want to
thing.
hear.
The thing is, we've got to prove that the WHO has been corrupted. Because the thing is, the WHO. is not supposed to tell sovereign countries what to do. They're only supposed to issue guidance. A lot of countries take that guidance simply because it's the easy route. So the only way to prove that there's something really wrong here, besides COVID, Ebola, and everything else, okay, and monkeypox, which isn't monkeypox anymore, but whatever, is
Mpox.
to show. Thank you. They keep changing names and everything. I shouldn't. Sorry, anybody got offended. I apologize. Um, is to show that that's the corruption is at the core of that. And the only way to show that the corruption is at the core of that is to talk to your government and say, listen, do you want a foreigner writing your policy for you? Because that's what's happening.
Mm.
Do we really want that? Do we really want that? Because that's what we did in the Philippines. That's what happened in Pakistan. That's kind of what's going on in Thailand to a certain extent. Okay. Um, it's the easy road, especially for countries that have tobacco interests. Now, I don't know if South Africa does. I know Kenya does, but I don't know if South Africa does. But it's people are disheartened right now, Kurt. But I've got to tell you that what's going on in South Africa has been happening in Asia for years, and you see that we're making progress. You can too.
I think we are making progress, and it is, maybe me running around the house with a tinfoil cap on has helped. But the, the issue is that, yes, it is a machine that we're working against. It really is a big machine. I think that we are getting some kind of opportunity to sit at the table. In fact, I have been invited to Parliament to go share my thoughts and insights around the bill, and that's coming
Okay,
up
good.
soon. It's just, yeah. I actually was thinking about this the other day. Is that is the Department of Health in South Africa actually the Department of Health, or is it just a department or section of the World Health Organization? Because whenever something is questioned, or
Mm,
if anything is on any topic for that matter, it's almost pointed to according to the gospel of the WHO.
yeah.
This is what it says, and it smacks of things like 1984, and it smacks of things like a Brave New World, where like
The world.
this
I knew you were going to say that.
this is what we dictate. This is the truth. But you're saying, but hang on, no,
Hmm.
there's nothing that supports that. No, that's the truth, according to the
Yeah.
WHO. That's it.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
if they don't use WHO, they use some other group. Then if you look in the background, but it's all linked back to the WHO, and it's all linked back
Yeah.
to the Bloomberg complex. And you go, but why aren't you actually seeing this? Why is this so
Because
hidden and
they're
transparent to
not
you?
they're not seeing it because they don't want to see
Okay.
it. Okay? Because in order to be able to see it and to be able to do something about it, they need the resources to be able to fight it. Sometimes it's easier to, in their minds, to lose the battle to win the war.
But don't you think
And that's what they
don't you think the revolving door thing also comes into play? Yeah. Because I
Yeah,
mean, one of the
absolutely.
most interesting things that I've discovered is that the coordinator for South Africa for the campaign for tobacco-free kids actually
Mhm.
worked for the National Department of Health for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
Um,
Brian King. Look at Brian King in the States.
yeah, the head of the FDA in terms of the tobacco. What was that department? Tobacco
Yeah,
policy,
CTP. Yeah.
CCTP,
Yeah.
and was very, very, very problematic with regards to how FDA's worked around
Mhm.
vaping or e-cigarettes in the United States. Has now switched to campaign for tobacco-free kids.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's
Yeah,
incestuous. I can put it. It's what it is. It's incestuous. It's a little cabal, and they all, especially in the States, they do the merry-go-round. People, not all people, because Mattawa Glover is a classic example of not being this, and Derek and Beagle Hall. But a lot of people who were involved in public health and tobacco control, they learned things a certain way. They got comfortable with things being that way, and they just continued it because, again, keep your head down, shut up, and just do what you're told.
and you will
Because
advance.
and you will advance. It's the same thing. Same as what they did in India when they said, okay, no more THR, research. It's fear. Okay, the majority of this is fear from all sides because here's this new and innovative thing that's working. We didn't come up with it. We can't make money off of it. This is an impact on my livelihood. And you know how human beings are when they feel threatened, they turn into, crazy people. This is what's happening. Okay. It takes somebody very enlightened and very willing to have an open mind to say, okay, maybe we've done it this way before. Let's look at this and let's be honest and say that the way we were doing this isn't working. And now here's this and it's working. Maybe we should embrace this.
And take a
But fear
long-term
prevents
view,
them from doing it.
and take a long-term
Yeah.
view, and get back to what the original plan was. I think that's,
Hmm.
to me, the
But
biggest thing is that we've walked away or stepped away from the original plan, the original
but the revolving
mission.
doors cause that
Yeah.
as well. But the revolving doors cause that as well. Because I mean, I know in Asia, it's a constant revolving door of ministers of health, constant elections. You get elections every 3 years. I mean, there's no continuity. The continuity should be from the top down, but it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, and you know how that works too, because you've got the same problem in South Africa. Continuity is an issue, and you hand off to the next person, and they don't know what the hell they're doing, so they're like, oh, what this guy do? Oh, yeah, I'll just carry on with this. Because, I mean, really, when you think about it, if you're a minister of health, you've got so many other things to deal with, especially in an LMIC. You've got infectious diseases. You've got to worry about the next, pandemic. You've got to all these other things that people in the West don't really have to worry about.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a very small piece of whatever's on the plate for them. So easy is best.
Absolutely. And let's face it, if you are a health minister or anybody working in a health department, it's not only just infectious diseases, making sure that your hospital networks and your hospital functions and all the other linked groups that feed into public health. It's not just
Yeah.
it's all of
Yeah.
this.
It's
And it's very easy to persuade those departments, particularly the ones that are working at the grindstone, for something that makes their life a little better, a little easier.
easier.
And the carrot is provided, but it's attached to a nice long string and a nice big stick, and they are led
Mm-hmm.
into these areas of that. And because they don't have the time or luxury of time or space, to to it it's taking full advantage of a very bad situation without actually providing real support.
It's predatory, like I said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nancy, we could go on for absolute ever. In fact, we
We
have in
go
many
on for
times before
days.
offline.
We have.
Uh,
Am I going to see you in Poland?
unfortunately, you're not. Unfortunately, you're not. Funding
Oh,
funding is an
okay.
issue, and I can't make it to Poland. It is a bit sad, but my spirit and my heart, and I'll definitely be viewing it remotely. But yeah, I think yeah, I can't make it, and it's really unfortunate, and it is it's something that changed my life, to be in Poland for that week. Um, but I like to thank you for taking the time. I know it's in the
Well,
evening there
thank
in
you for
Auckland.
having
I'd
me.
also like to thank you for spending so much time, providing the information, providing the support that you do, not only to the Asian area, but to us here in Africa too. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very
And I
welcome.
really hope one day we can chat again on the Pack Breakers, or maybe even in person, um, when we get to touch sides in Poland or another conference. So thank you very much,
Yeah.
Nancy,
Thanks, Kurt.
and you have a wonderful evening.
You have a lovely day.
Cheers, everybody.